All right. Welcome, everybody. This is Automotive Informants. We've got a special guest, Dennis from Lot Law. Zach, I saw Dennis because he's been probably doing content for a long time, but I just recently started seeing it on my feed and I was like, man, this guy's got some good information. He's talking as from an attorney's lens, a dealer, operator, owner lens, and just an all around great background. And when you see some of his content, he's really, really thorough. So, Dennis, thank you for jumping on board with us today.
Well, thank you, Chris and Zach. It's a pleasure, and this is my first podcast, and we're going to start at the top. So I appreciate it.
All right,
Thank
cool.
you.
Well, let's just jump right in because yesterday I saw it on social. I forgot what forum I was in, and somebody posted something about CarGurus sending letters to dealers yesterday. And it's exactly what a lot of the content recently you've been talking about, Dennis. And I'd really like your opinion because when I've been talking to dealers, even some of the people I've worked with in the past that had addendums, and I just never felt good about how we had to disclose some of this stuff. They would put it in the notes at the bottom, but they wouldn't really say a dollar amount. And now that's all coming ahead now. So, Dennis, you want to kind of jump in and tell us about your 2 cents on this CarGuru thing?
I only found out about it obviously yesterday with everybody else. I didn't get the email because thankfully I am no longer part of the CarGurus ecosphere. I am very proud of that. So I've only heard about it secondhand. I have not seen the letter. So the letter, if you want to go through the letter, maybe we can comment a little bit more on it.
I've got it here. So basically, starting July 14th, dealers who don't disclose their fees, addendums, will have their used inventory labeled no rating. And they're going to be pushed lower in search results, making their vehicles less visible to shoppers. So that was the whole, it was it was like maybe 2-3 paragraphs in that letter, but that was the key takeaway. So do you think July 14th is too late, or what do you think?
Well, certainly for the regulators, they can go back on this. And I have been maintaining for a while that if the FTC wanted to do something that was actually helpful, they would go after the third-party listing sites. This is the well from which it all springs. And, dealers are highly incentivized to have low numbers and then change them when you get into the dealership. One of the things, there's a lot of things that got me out of the business, my poor customer service probably being at the top. But one of the things that just drove me crazy was I really wanted to give value to my customers. And in an independent space, I think you give value to your customers by de-risking used cars as best as you can and having your own processes internally streamlined to give that value. But when you are up against a dealer that will come in $2,000 to $3,000 under you, get them in the box, and then just lean on them, we all know it works. And they come out then, $1,500 ahead of where you are. You never get the lead, you never get the person in front of you, and you lose even though you have the far better deal and the far better value. So as an industry, I think that most of us anyway are going to be very happy. The people that thought that this was more fuel for your private jet are going to be a little sad because they're going to find out this business isn't as profitable as they once thought it was. But for most of us, I think this is the business we always thought it was.
I agree with you. I think, especially for independents, right? Independents have had the brunt force of all of this, right? Like dealers would have these 4,000 or 5,000 addendums, and then they couldn't compete because they're trying to do it pretty ethical to certain degrees. Because I heard a comment on social the other day that 50% of them are great and 50% are crooks or something like that. I don't know what the real benchmark is on that, but there is that. And this guy from Delivered, believe it or not, because I've been listening to how he's negotiating, it's actually made me more aware of how bad some of these dealers are, because it's kind of crazy. And what I feel like, addendums started out with window tint, $4.99 window tint, and then they kind of ballooned and evolved into these $5,000 addendums with some weird protection that you never heard of, and it's just it got kind of crazy.
It's beyond crazy. I think when you look at this stuff, it isn't stuff you would buy. It's stuff you would tell your family to run from, and it's all incredibly high margin. And when I was doing it, we were cursed with selling the 6-liter Ford diesels, and everybody wants the bulletproof EGR package. And so that was one of our add-ons, right? We would sell the bulletproof each yard package. The base one was 2,900, and it would go all the way up to 8 grand. And people couldn't wait to pay, and they were thrilled to pay. Obviously, it wasn't the margin of the titanium wheel locks or the desert protection package or any of these other silly ones. But the idea that dealers can't get back to real add-ons that really provide value, again, they're not as lucrative as what you have now. But there's a ton of stuff that can really help the customer add value, and it can be done legally and can be done through Section 5. None of this stuff is written out. You just have to have the same story end to end. I think that's really what's going to change for some of these dealers is, when you start it, when you advertise it, all the way through your pencil, all the way into the buyer's order, and then the installment contract, we need to tell the same story.
I agree. I think, what's funny is then you start looking at what's going on with these dock fees, right? Because I've worked at different stores across the country, and you see some where they're $200, you see some for like $1,500, and how they're so just all over the place. Now that they're going to have to actually mark that on the website and put exactly what kind of dock fee they have, what's the likelihood you think that dealers are going to actually start lowering those, or now that margin goes away?
Well, this is my kind of own hot take. With the Section 5 stuff, let me back up a second. With the Section 5, it's still a little bit of Wild West into figuring out what the regulators want to really get into. We're going to have the FAQs coming out here any day, and that will really help some of this. But in my opinion, right now, reading the tea leaves for the dock fee, is that fee has to be obviously included in your overall price. So factually, what it's become now is just dealer accounting. If you said that the car is $30,000 and you want to charge a $29,000 dock fee, so long as the state doesn't preclude it, and charge $1,000 for the car, I don't actually think there's anything wrong with that. You're still selling it for $30,000. You still are hitting the number. They can buy it for what you've advertised it for. So I think now you're just looking at it's just simply an accounting metric, and what you want to do internally and how you want to work the pack and pay your guys and all that.
Yeah, and Zach, when you look at it from your side of the house, I get like a mixed bag on service. Like people in my service department, I used to hear them think, "Oh, my dealership's trying to screw me," or they're trying to get me too. What is your experience when you've seen some of these addendums and dock fees?
As a technician looking at an addendum, probably the best example I have is looking at, Toyota dealerships, because they're horrible about it. You go and look at a Tundra or Tacoma that's got a 3-inch, Pro Comp lift on it or some garbage lift, and they're charging $8,000, $9,000 for that. I think it's personally ridiculous, but I also look at it through a technician lens, and working for Mercedes and doing the silly illuminated stars in the front grille. I made so much money at that because I could do it quickly and it paid a lot. So I love it and I hate it at the same time. I love it as a tech, I hate it as a consumer. But then you look into dock fees, and the bigger question I have, and maybe I'm just ignorant to this, but as we see these, let's call it third-party sites or more middlemen and people putting their hands in the cookie jar, are we seeing all these dock fees and addendums start to go up on higher margin items such as that window tint, ceramic coats, which we know literally cost nothing to apply? Are we seeing those costs start to be baked in as more brokers and third-party sites enter the market to kind of pad their margins a little bit?
Yeah, no, well, here's the challenge there. Once everybody's like on the same playing field, it's hard to pad a $4,000 markup, right? Because now you just look like you're $4,000 more than everybody else. So,
but if everybody's doing that,
what's that?
Like it reminds me of the Amazon play, right? If you are in the CPG space at all, or have ever dabbled in it, and you look at Amazon, I compare that to kind of CarGurus, where you've got all these listers selling, let's call it the same item or similar items, and it's who can get down to bottom dollar, but eventually they get to a point where it's like, okay, well, this person can raise their price a few dollars here, and then everybody else raises theirs. And I don't really feel like that's going to be great for the consumer, because there's no longer going to be deals to shop for. So then we talk about brokers. What's their role then anymore?
Well, there's that, because, TrueCar for the longest time made you want to just, or encourage you to discount your cars, or else you wouldn't get at the leads. And so that was like a knife fight to the end, right? Everybody was discounting just to get the customer. But, if everybody's on the same playing field, then everybody's just going to have to price their vehicles to the market and what the market is showing. So I don't necessarily think that people will just lose their margin. I think on the opposite's going to happen. I think if everyone's on the same playing field, people will actually make more. What do you think, Dennis?
I don't know that I can sign off on the make more. I think what we're going to see is it's going to be normalized. So the dealers that were playing more of the straight up game, their margins probably aren't going to increase, but their gross certainly is. And the guys that were playing, these games, they're going to see their margins fall and probably their gross fall with it. So I think we're going to see a flattening of the market, and dealers are going to have to get back to what's your unique selling proposition. Mine was this kind of streamlined back end where I could keep my costs low and deliver that onto the consumer. And, if yours was, I can underprice things on CarGurus so that I can knock it up when you walk in the door, take 6 hours of your life and then jam you into a contract, that's not going to be so unique anymore. And you're going to have to figure out a better way to do it. But, to Zach's point, I actually don't so much mind, the lift kits and that sort of stuff getting added. I always wonder why Toyota doesn't have a TRD exhaust on every Supra that goes out. That's how the semi-custom home industry works. You want a different faucet or you want a new door on your house, and they charge you retail plus, it, and they roll it into the loan and everybody's fine with it. And, I think that's a legitimate way to do it. I don't, that doesn't shock me. The customer knows that they could get it cheaper, but it's a convenience and they can roll it into their loan and it's fine.
Yeah, and that part I don't mind so much. I think it's the weird warranties that I've seen on some of these addendums that I just, I just don't really agree with. But then I look at where I think you'll see it kind of flatten and they won't make money is those dealers that have been unethical, or not necessarily unethical, just not disclosing anything. I don't know. You take your pick which one you want to use, which term. But specifically in Florida, when you see dealers that the doc fee just ranges so much. I've seen some, I think, doc fees at like $1,500, some at $800. And it's just, I think if anything, that's going to kind of normalize. Either everyone's going to go to the same number like it does in Texas. Like once you can get to 225 or 250 based on your volume, you get there, and every dealer tries to get there. But you're capped. You can't go over that. But then in Florida, and even like Oklahoma, I don't know that there is a real cap there. So I think if anything, that's where some of that margin compression will happen, because now that everyone has to disclose it, it's not going to be as exciting when you try to hide it going in. Zach,
no,
it looks like you had something on your mind.
I do. So I'm just thinking to myself, if kind of the bad dealers start to go away and, everybody's just upfront and honest and fair, does that mean there's going to become a serious lack of content available for calling dealerships on the phone and exposing bad behavior and making catchy thumbnails and titles about it? That would really
I don't know that ever goes away. I think if everybody turned into CarMax, maybe, but I just don't see that happening.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you got a sore spot for somebody, Zach, but I know Dennis can have some insight there. I know you had a conversation with Delivered here recently, and I actually personally, I think what he's doing is kind of cool, because it's brought to light what a lot of these dealers are doing, and it's crazy to me when I see some of these salespeople talking to him and trying to be, the bravado that they have, knowing that they're still being recorded. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, well, I mean, where to start, right? I think, from a 100,000 foot perspective, as an industry, I think internally we like to see ourselves as a little bit precious and, the good people fighting the fight. Externally, we're seen as, the people that are just lining our pockets. And, quite frankly, I'm a pilot and I live in Tucson. And if the best way to have a private jet on the field is to own a franchise dealership. So, pretending like this, isn't shoveling money in many instances is really disingenuous. So I think we kind of have to start from that framing of, the consumers are already skeptical of us, and they have good reason to be skeptical of us, right? We're not the victims here. And then when you watch somebody like Tommy, go through this, and, you see him call the BDC, who claims to be sales, and then they pass you off. And then somebody in pseudo sales or whatever gets the phone. They have no idea what you just talked about. You start over again. You're trying to get prices. All they want you to do is come in. Your presence is your power. Everybody internally knows that that's marketing junk. We all know that that's wrong. So you're just putting the customer through all of these unnecessary hurdles. And the fact that nobody can seem to want to give customers a dual lane to buy a car. Right, there's some people that want the Carvana experience. I know what I want. Give me the numbers. I'm going to send you the wire. Ship me the car. We're done. There's other people that, I want a laser light show. I want to show up with palms waving to me as I walk in as the champion. They want both. And nobody can seem to offer them both. So I think until we get to that, sort of level where people understand there's two lanes and we need to figure out what customer wants what, we're going to keep seeing these videos online and, this kind of craziness. I don't know that I quite answered the question, but that was my own rant.
No, I think it's true. I think they're providing a service. Initially, I was always the guy that, and I had to write a post recently saying that I was wrong. Like I used to say, man, those dealers don't exist anymore. Like we're I know a lot of really good dealers. We're doing good, doing this for 23 years. But then I started watching some of his stuff and I'm like, man, this is eye opening. I was shocked at how bad some of these conversations were, and I was just like, it's crazy. But I've even commented on some of these guys' posts and saying, well, I think the people that keep this narrative alive are the reason why people have this, negative affliction towards car dealers. But reality is, no, it's because there's a lot of people out there that are doing things that are just not as ethical as you could be. Like I don't know why, like you said, there should be at least two lanes, and at the very least just have the one lane. Just be, tell people what the price is. It is what it is. If you don't want to move forward, let's see if we can find you another vehicle in your price point.
Yeah, well, you always hear, well, I'm going to get shopped. I mean, welcome to America. Yeah,
welcome to America. I mean, that's the name of the game, right?
Yeah, it's again, there's that kind of precious attitude that comes in, and the people, it's the internet.
I love what you just said there. That it's that precious attitude, and you're right. I really believe that.
Yeah. Sorry, Zach. Go ahead.
You're good. I don't know. I almost take a different approach with it because it ties back into what happens whenever everything is level and even. In my opinion, it becomes a participation trophy for all, where everybody is equal and everybody has the same opportunity to win a customer, and it's going to come down to who has the better coffee and donuts in their waiting room. And I look at it from the same lens of, if we don't have competition and there aren't, let's say bad actors and consumers just get lazy and no longer inform themselves, how many people do you think actually read the manual in their car these days? And then they come into the shop and it turns out to be a normal condition of operation when the technician wastes an hour of warranty time to diagnose it and doesn't get paid. It's most.
I think you're right to a certain point. Let me tell you, when this ties right back into this FTC thing, then why would the FTC send 97 letters to dealer groups? Not just like 97 stores, 97 dealer groups. And if you added how many stores that was in a collective, it was a pretty big number. I didn't get the exact number specifically, but they were like major dealer groups. It wasn't like a mom and pop type deal. This was real stores. And I know, Dennis, you kind of like had some insight on that letter. What was your take on it?
Yeah, obviously I've read the letter, I've read the settlements. I've gone through the whole thing. It's been kind of interesting to watch the evolution of this. Where they started with the CARS Act, and for procedural reasons that got thrown out, and then like every good administrative agency, they said, oh wait, we have the power anyway. We don't need that. We already have Section 5, with our unfair and deceptive language, and we're gonna make it mean whatever we think it means, and off we go. But from that part of skepticism, and I kind of gruffle at when they enforce this stuff that way. But then you look at what they actually said and what those letters were and what they are alleging. And, obviously the dealers didn't admit any fault to this. But you read this stuff, and I mean, this isn't dealers that were, tacking on a $2.99 doc fee. Even though that's not allowed. That's not what this was about. And if that's all it was ever about, we wouldn't have had this. I mean, this was truly about deceptive stuff. I mean, and frankly, just stealing, outright stealing. Putting things into contracts that weren't there, burying things in disclosures that should have been right up front. People that truly didn't know what they were buying, informed consumers that didn't know what they were buying, attorneys that didn't know what they were buying, and finding all this stuff out after the fact. I think they're right, And if you go back and you look at like the Lindsay settlement and the Napleton stuff and all that, you're just going to see this gross deviation, from business norms, and really profits at all costs. And I hate to say it as a former dealer and somebody that loves the industry, but a lot of this stuff is really gross.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to the fact that it was like they were being deceptive, like whatever was on the worksheet wasn't on the actual contract. And it reminds me of a story. I'll tell you this: an acquaintance of mine. We were having conversations about some of the craziness that you've seen or you've heard in this industry. And he told me about a story about this one guy back in like the 90s, or I don't remember. He said this was a long time ago, so I don't know exactly what time frame this happened. But he said that this one salesman was so ruthless that he would tell him like, "Hey, look, this vehicle, I'm going to go and throw in the warranty, this and that." And then once the customer got to the contract, there was a $3,000 fee for a warranty. And he said, "Wait a minute, you told me you were going to give this to me for free." And he's like, No. I gave it to you for free, but I had to put it on the contract to make it look like it was there. And when I heard that, I was like, I couldn't believe that someone had the courage to just be completely just dishonest like that, and then to get away with it. Like I just it's shocking to me that there are people that would go to those lanes to do things like that. Zach, you look like you wanted to say something right there, sir. Go ahead.
No, it's just there are 100% highly deceptive people in the industry. I mean, it's always been that way. But I also challenge: have you ever bought a house? You ever bought anything else? I mean, you ever bought produce in the grocery store where they say it's organic, but it's sprayed with 10 different kinds of shit? I mean, every industry lies. Every industry has bad actors.
Does it
Why?
make it right? Does it make it right? Well, because I could tell you the same thing happens at Target and Walmart all the time. My wife,
That's what I'm
if I
saying.
go into the store and I try to buy something, she says, "Make sure you use the app." And I was like, okay. So you'll be surprised how many times you use the app, and online it's cheaper than it is in the store. And this is at any retail establishment anywhere, which is, but and I get your point. Automotive is put at a different level. And I think it's because you hear it the most, and that's squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I struggle with a government agency getting so involved in car sales. That's really where I start to struggle, because why? Why are we seeing that happen? What's the long-term push there? Especially, I mean, when it comes to the FTC and everything else that goes on.
Well, I don't disagree. I think, and maybe you can shed some light on this, Dennis. During the CFPB era, I remember them fining dealers, and because they weren't, they would base it on discrimination lending practices, right? And you would see, I think Toyota was one of the companies, Wells Fargo. There was a lot of lenders that actually, I think, got fined at some point. I'll have to go back and research. But what I didn't like about that, because I had the conversation with the lender, and they said, well, you have African Americans, Hispanic, Asian, and all these, and these people you're actually charging higher interest on. And I go, okay, how do you know that? And so, well, based on zip code. And I would look at some of these zip codes, and I'd be like, well, I'm Hispanic. I live in this zip code, but because I'm in this zip code, I'm considered white. Like, I just didn't understand their methodology, that how they would come out about charging dealers or fining them based on, discrimination. And you're looking at them like, well, I looked at a lot of these zip codes that they stated, these are predominantly Hispanic communities, or these are predominantly African American communities. And I would look at them like, it just wasn't accurate. And you would see different other cultures like Indian and Asian minorities, and for whatever reason they paid even less. So and then you start thinking, well, maybe it's more of the culture thing, where some cultures just negotiate more than others. And I don't know. What was your thought on that whole CFPB era?
That drove me bonkers, because that the disparate impact fishing expeditions, I thought is really what they were. The disparate impact idea, I'm going to get a little ahead of my skis here. Now I have to go back to my bar prep work, remember all my constitutional law stuff. But, that comes from figuring out protected classes and if laws were facially neutral. So you'd have a law that was facially neutral where you said, well, it doesn't discriminate against anybody. But then they'd look at the data in aggregate and they say it has a disparate impact. And, then they would start hooking laws that way. And, so they were applying the same kind of logic to, the lending world and saying, well, if we can show, the numbers in aggregate, then somewhere, somehow the puppeteer is manipulating these things. Rather than what you said, where, instead of simply basing, on the basis of somebody's skin color or sexual orientation or some other protected class, it may be cultural. There may be other reasons, and it may just be statistical anomalies. Who knows? And the fact that they could make, these kind of crazy cases out of whole cloth, no, that drove me absolutely bonkers. I'm really excited and happy to see that they've done away with that. Hopefully to never return.
Right there with you. I hope they never return. But then you think about what today's administration, you hear they have an AI czar, somebody that's really into AI. That AI space is best friends with, Elon Musk and all these other people that are in technology. And you think about how easily they're incorporating technologies in our government. The dealers today that just are not afraid to, price their cars a certain way, I think are going to be in a rude awakening sooner than later, because, they didn't need a CFPB. They didn't need any of these other, agencies to go after dealers. And now with technology as easy as it is to create, I think from an auditing perspective, I think dealers are going to be in for a rude awakening. What are your thoughts on that angle, Dennis?
So it's interesting because, you and I are actually, we're both in tech. I'm an electrical engineer by my undergrad, and I've developed all of the software for my dealerships. I continue to develop software. I'm working with the frontier models every day. And I talk to dealers, as I'm sure you guys do, about the different AI stuff. And they all seem to be in disbelief because, it's not that good. I got a chatbot that does this. But as we know, we're dealing with the frontier stuff that's really pushing the edge. They're dealing with, Gemini 2.5 Flash that doesn't know anything. And so we're like, yeah, the stuff you're seeing is already a year and a half, 2 years old. And, just wait until we get there. So it seems like there's kind of two conversations happening where we talk past each other. So I would just say to the dealers, that have a skeptical eye on this, and, I tried a chatbot once and it didn't work, and these things are stupid and they don't know what they're doing, and they're certainly not going to be able to audit me and come through and look at this stuff in mass. You are deluding yourself. It is coming quickly. Now, it can be used for offense. It can also be used for defense. I think that the biggest thing today is you need a comprehensive look, which is what, I'm trying to do with Law, a comprehensive look at what your compliance strategy is. Does your social media match your pencil, match your addendums? Does it, can you tell a coherent story front to back? And that is one of the things that AI is going to be really good at helping you with. So I don't see it so much as a sword, but a shield that can really work well for your particular store.
And I'm interested to learn more about what your technology is, because I do know from a compliance standpoint, a lot of dealers just aren't there. They bought a couple of compliance tools back in last couple of years that were hot on the market, but they feel like to that extent that they're safe. How deep are you doing your analysis when you get these generated reports for these dealers?
Well, so now I'm trying to figure out where the dividing lines are, where they need help. Do we need safeguard audits? Do we need deal jacket audits? Do we need social media and advertising audits? Where are the lines actually breaking down? But, I can tell you, for instance, I'm doing a social media audit program right now where, you have your salesman log into TikTok, for instance, do a OAuth API back to my service. And then every video they post, I then send off to Google for Translate. I take a screenshot every 5 seconds, scrape the screenshot, scrape the description, and start looking for, are they using trigger words or certain things that would implicate trigger words? I came across a guy the other day, salesman. I felt bad. He was trying to do the right thing, but he was making a raffle for anybody that came by to test drive a truck to get a Rolex. And, that is just begging for the Attorney General to come storming down your door. And dealers don't know that this stuff is happening. So you really do need a comprehensive, look at this stuff, I think, from end to end. And so, I just started this, frankly, 6 weeks ago, as Tommy was sure to remind me. You've only been doing this for 6 weeks. I mean, I've been living dealer compliance for 20 years. But as far as figuring out, to your question, how do dealers, look at this? It's an ongoing question. It's still an open question for me. But I think, we're getting there, and we're trying to figure out where the bounds are.
I think you hit a really big subject. There's a lot of people on social media that want to become, Facebook famous, that are actively saying things about their dealership, pricing, rates, that live on their channels forever. And, at what point does the government go after and start auditing some of these videos? And now that the technology that you have exists where they could audit every Facebook, YouTube video that is out there, where do they draw the line? Do they say, well, if you've got a rogue salesperson that's out there advertising, $100 payments with 0 down and, 0%, that's okay because it's not on your main site?
Well, no, that is definitely going to fall within the purview of you've got some guy out there acting rogue, but he's still acting on your behalf. He's still your responsibility. That is absolutely going to come down, on the dealership for allowing that and not policing it. So, like I said, you need a comprehensive system, to look at these things and make sure that these guys are staying within the guardrails. Because, like you said, they want to make, their whole TikTok famous, have a dealership essentially within a dealership. But ultimately, it's going to fall back on your license. And it is something, you've really got to, have some kind of system in place to pay attention to this stuff.
The other thing I wanted to ask, too, is because you have a lot of these salespeople and just employees at stores that are negotiating with customers on the phone, and you're hearing the customer's voice, and they're not trying to tell the customer's name, but you can hear their voice. At what point does having to mask the voice become even more important as well? I mean, could a customer come back and sue the dealership because this salesperson recorded the whole conversation without telling, and then didn't disclose the name, but they did have their voice, and some people could hear that voice and determine that it was them?
Well, I will put a pin in this and a disclaimer for everything, right? I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. This is not legal advice. And I can only speak generally on this. This isn't a topic that I know terribly well. I've done a little bit of research into this. But in general, if you are in a one-party state and the customer reaches in and calls you, this call is going to be subject to your laws. And so there really wouldn't be little wrong with recording it and letting it out. Now, broadcasting is a different story. So you'll see on the lives where people are broadcasting, there are different laws that have governed, people that were put on, for instance, CBS, national, and they didn't know that they were, and they got made fun of and ridiculed and all that stuff. So the candid camera stuff has always been allowed to go on, within bounds of, name, image, likeness, and how to control that. But it is something you have to be careful of. And I would definitely encourage, if you are a dealership that's doing lives, especially with customers that don't know that they are on it, absolutely talk to your local attorney and figure out if that's allowed in your area and what the national implications could be.
Yeah, because you're even seeing some of these guys with their meta glasses and having these conversations with customers while they don't even know. And yeah, they don't tell them their name, but you definitely see their face and hear their voice.
Yeah, and I'm sorry not to interrupt, but I forgot too that obviously if you start getting into any kind of financial stuff, even the fact that they are financing, you're implicating a lot of safeguard stuff at this point now too. And what is your compliance strategy for that as you're leaking it on the internet? It's a lot to worry about. That's why the safer route is to tell the customer you're doing it, record it, and then have some sort of compliance. It doesn't have to be an attorney, but somebody that knows at least what they're doing, and make sure that you're not putting it out there in a way you don't want. Which I think is always good business strategy anyway, right? I mean, we should know what we're putting out there.
100%. Zach, what are your 2 cents on that?
I wholeheartedly agree. There are reasons why I do not make certain types of content, because if it were to sway a certain way one day, it could come back and not be a very pretty sight. And I think a lot of people they skirt the line, and sometimes they may dip a toe over, but damn, I don't like getting that close to it. It's just a dangerous.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting time, to say the least. When I think about all the technology, I mean, we saw what happened recently with Mythos, the Fable 5, and basically when they released that for Claude, they shut it down within a week because they were able to break through NSA within seconds, and AI just went in on their own and did it, which I found fascinating when I read that article. But when you see these types of technologies, how quickly they can literally just run through the whole internet, find data, audit. I mean, I think dealers really need to understand the times we're in, and they should be really trying to figure out how to make sure that they're at least pricing their vehicles, because a lot of these videos and things that they promote are on the internet forever. It's not like it's something they can go and just scrub out pretty quickly, but they've got to be careful what they're saying, how they're saying it. It's just definitely interesting times. But Zach, we had one more article I thought we were going to kind of go through to kind of jump to this new subject. And I'd love to hear what your opinion on it was. There was a guy that came out recently from a technician standpoint, and he was really kind of breaking down how much dealers make versus what he makes. And wanted to get your take on that article.
We are going to have a very different opinion here. I'm sure of that. But from a technician standpoint, I mean, I can understand a dealership is going to take on all the risk in buying the building, buying the inventory, working with a credit union, a bank, whatever, hiring salespeople. I understand that, right? They're also floating the insurance policy, the shop, and most of the lifts and equipment. But at the same time, it follows the same analogy of, the boss makes a dollar, I make a dime. It's a very unbalanced equation when you look at a dealership and you look at the hours that technicians are supposed to run, how much stuff gets goodwilled by service, and then technicians get screwed, and then dealers want to come out and bitch and say, well, we don't have enough techs. I wonder why. And then you're going to have no service department. You expect robots to catch up in the meantime? That's not going to happen, because who's going to service the robots? Probably a technician.
There's going to be other technicians. But Dennis, just to give you a little bit more context on this article, and it was really a breakdown of some YouTuber that did a really good job, but he had just gone through NADA's earnings or release of however dealers get paid on labor sales, how they pay their technicians, all of it. And so what he came to the conclusion was the technicians are 30% of that cog, and the dealers make the rest of the margin when it comes to charging customers. I think we're, good for the dealer to make the money he's making or she's making, but is that crossing a line? I don't know that 30% is, that unfair. I think, the market dictates what people get paid. And I don't know that, dealer can make more money. God bless them. What are your thoughts, Dennis?
I don't know the warranty side of this terribly well. I know the independent side very well, and where the dealers have to compete with the independent shops. And you got these, in my area, in Arizona, and especially in Tucson, we're not exactly the biggest metropolitan area. And I don't know of a good tech that isn't flat rate making six figures. I mean, there's just a lack of people in the industry right now. If you're a good body guy, you call your shots. There's just nobody out there. So I would assume that dealers are experiencing kind of the same sort of crunch. I know that in the independent repair space, oftentimes they don't like dealer techs because, the dealer techs just tend to read books and throw parts at it and see what sticks. I'm sure I just angered everybody out there, right? But
hey, no, I'll tell you, I used to say that about my body guys, because I would go, man, when do you guys never even like repair bumpers anymore? It's always, let's replace it and fix it. I'm like, it's never like Bondo you guys just want to replace the part and let's move on. So yeah, no, I get that.
But directly to your question, I heard of a dealer, I think it was an Audi dealer in Santa Monica, that's charging $420 an hour, or just some crazy number. And I'm sure that tech is not being paid, what would be the equivalent flat rate of that? $150 an hour? There's no way. So I am sympathetic a little bit that they're bringing in a disproportionate amount of value. And, but I would say that given how few techs there are, that are worth anything, if you're a good tech and, that you can really call your shots too. So I would say, use your advantage. Don't stick with the same guys if you think you're getting messed over, because there's somebody that's definitely going to pay you what you're worth.
100%. And just to kind of put some light on that, I read a study once somewhere where the people who move more frequent in their career tend to make more money. So if you're a tech that's been there for 20 years, you may want to look at and I'm not trying to like encourage you, if you're happy, stay there, but if you want to make more money, you're more likely to make more money if you move to a different store, and they may, because of your experience, pay you even more than you thought you could be paid. So I do think that, you're right, Tex. I thought this guy missed the mark on it. I think, from a consumer standpoint, I could see the argument that maybe the rates have gone up, but what I've seen in the marketplace, we've been paying techs even more money. So I don't know that the data was 100% where he was looking at, but I can just tell from my experience, and maybe as a whole in these rural areas, maybe, but in the bigger cities, I think it's a lot more competitive for sure. Zach, you
Oh
got
no,
that little look on your face, man. I want to, you kind of want to jump out at it.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I looking at it and have lived it, I agree with what you're saying about moving around. The thing that I found, and what ultimately got me out of turning wrenches and onto ADOS and calibrations and developing tech and whatnot, that's really where dealers that wouldn't train their guys, that's the big problem in the industry, because with every cert usually comes an extra dollar an hour flat rate or whatever you want to equate it to. But the other thing that I challenge is that proportionate. Yes, we're paying techs more, but is it in proportion to how expensive everything else has gotten? Because from what I've seen, it's not. Salespeople make more than techs. That's generally the issue.
Sometimes
No matter how many parts.
I'd say 20% of the staff might, but 80% of that staff isn't making nearly what techs are making. I can tell you, like from a sales standpoint, like those salespeople, it's the 80-20 rule that 20% of your staff makes big money in sales, but the 80% of them just aren't. It is what it is. But hey, we're coming to an end now, and I definitely want to thank both of you guys for jumping on today. But before we close this out, understanding everything that we kind of talked to, and I think we could have even expanded more on some of the dealer groups you talked about, that the Nissan dealers specifically that got fined or getting audited right now, and FTC and all. I mean, there's just so many things happening all at once. What do you, and I'll start with you, Zach, what do you think dealers could do today to help them, improve and basically just win their market?
I think a big part of it's education. It's education. It's start to become more transparent and understand. I mean, there are becoming fewer and fewer places to hide these days. And so, yeah, you need to start thinning the herd, culling your employees, and figure out, what's going to get me through this and also get me to that next level. And how do I become a dealer that's providing the education, keeping everything in line with incoming regulation and rules and audits, and then also just be more transparent, because you're going to get called out. There are plenty of people making.
Yeah, with social media the way it is, it's yeah, you got to be careful about those people that can't wait to put you on record. Dennis, what do you think?
Well, I've spoken to a lot of good dealers, because of course the dealers that contact me are the ones that want to be good, right? So I don't hear from the ones that want to pull their shenanigans. And the ones that want to be good, they're really scared. And I think that they need to tone it down a little bit. I think, Chris, as you said earlier, and it's absolutely true, the squeaky wheel here is going to get the grease. And, if you're the guy who's really trying to do it right, you have processes in place, sometimes you slipped up. You can read in what these auditors say and what they write. I mean, they are not ready to slam the hammer down on one or two mistakes. If your social media guy has a car that's posted for sale that's been sold, it's not a bait and switch. Everyone's not going to jail. We're not getting FTC letters. Perhaps if somebody actually saw it, you might get a warning or even just a passing thought on it. But, don't get overly wrapped up in that. But I would say to everybody else, it's going to be about creating one cohesive story. I think if you can create a story and you can say, from the price that I put on the website that my salesman said, to the time that they walked in, to the time that they, got the first negotiation, to the time they signed the buyer's order and they got the retail salesman contract, this is all a cohesive unit. There wasn't, things being added, weird things being thrown in. They weren't surprised. It's all part of our same story, and we tell the story every time. You're going to be 99% of the way there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we need more dealers like that. Unfortunately, there just are, for as many dealers that are trying to do it right, there's still that many trying to cut a corner. They're just not listening to what's happening in the marketplace at all. And I think that the whole transparency, like that's just what it should be. Because now with AI answers and all these different, I think it's like 1 billion users a week on GPT, and people asking questions. And if you start popping up as the dealer to avoid, you've got some pretty big problems there. But I think as long as they've got technology and people out there trying to take care of them, it's all about how they're hiring people. Because the worst thing, because I've seen some good dealers have the wrong hire that cost them a fortune because they did some craziness. And believe me, I've had to let go of several people because of some of the shenanigans that I heard they do. So you've got to be careful on how you're hiring people, especially in today's market, as people do tend to, hop.
I couldn't agree more. As I said to other dealers, your compliance story now may be fine, but the turnover is so hot and heavy, you can find yourself on the wrong side of it quickly.
Yes. Well, that's the end. This went by really quick. Thank you for jumping on today, Dennis. Zach, as always, it's always great to have you on and working through the pros and cons of things. I like how you're my sounding board when I try to reach out and think, am I looking at this from one lens, or let me always hear a different perspective. So thank you for being here today. But guys, if you could please share, like, comment, subscribe. We're going to be posting this out. But Dennis, I will send you a video here afterwards. That way you can have it and you can share and do what you want with it. But tune in every week, everybody. Thank you guys for jumping on, and I look forward to next week.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.